obviously I'm the founder of Telescope. Got my team here, by the way. Althea, Loren, Andrew and Megan. So this is it's actually the first time we've been together, all 5 of us. Loren just started yesterday, and Althea's sort of part-time at the moment. But so this is thanks for the kind of company meeting. It's really helpful. Hopefully we can all kind of pick your brain. Oh, Aaron's up there. Hey, mate. Hopefully we can get some insights as well. So I want some hard questions to us, our team, to me. I'd love deep tech questions. It's really helpful just picking your minds as well. So please interrupt at any moment. And then of course afterwards I'd love to get your feedback on what we're doing. So yeah, as Chris mentioned, just got back from San Francisco. That's not normal for me. I've actually never been there before. It was unbelievable. Who here has been to SF before? Yeah, heaps. Awesome. It's like a calling, for anyone that has background in technology. And this man was the one responsible for bringing me over. So very grateful to for Ben to make that call. I was in New Zealand with Althea at the time, and Ben invited me over on the AI delegation tour last week, where we met with incredible companies, and learned about the kind of underlying infra tech and the foundation models themselves, and met all sorts of startups from Japan, Korea, India, obviously the US, Australia, on what they were building across multiple verticals. So it was really interesting. So what I've done is I've ripped off heaps of notes from that week, and I've attributed it because it's not my ideas, but it's thought-provoking, and then I'll talk through kind of what we're doing at Telescope. So another quick question though, I want to know who's building with AI in their business at the moment. Just a quick show of hands. Awesome, crazy. And what about just in your daily lives? Just I know I do it personally with my kids, just solving simple problems. Is it as just kind of a productivity tool? Cool. So one of the interesting, it's not working. It was working. One of the interesting questions that was asked last week, or the conversation that came up, was what is the nature of intelligence? And is this as simple as it gets? Do we just really need to kind of take a prediction on text and look for correlation between tokens or language to create intelligence? Is that all it took? Billions of parameters, a lot of compute time, a lot of money, a lot of content, and then boom, we've created AGI. Is that where things are going? And so some of the studies that have been done around this, and we experienced this with early versions of LLMs, with ChatGPT. You had these kind of breaks or hallucinations or factual errors, or just it couldn't understand more of these complex reasoning tasks. And so again, is this just is achieving AGI just a limitation of context? Is it a limitation of training time? Or is there something still fundamentally missing? And so I've attributed stolen thoughts, this is not mine, and a bunch of these photos I took, zoomed in, or things I've scraped off the internet from the studies that were referenced last week. But when it comes to building an LLM and kind of proving out its capabilities, it started with really simple tests, so maths tests and English tests from 5-year-olds, all the way through to really heavy academic tests on literature, and some of these more kind of theory of the mind tasks, they call it. So are we seeing the theory of the mind develop in LLMs? And so it's heavily debated, but you take these kind of tasks, these transfer tasks, and see if LLMs are capable. And this is where it's measured at the moment. It's sort of 7-year-old capability on GPT-4 for some of those more complex tasks. So it's hard to explain what it is, but I think an example is it's called, one of these examples is trusted testimony. So if your friend says that this thing occurred and in his state of mind, this is what he knows, but you have no factual awareness as to whether that's true. Is an LLM capable of sort of adopting their mindset on a task and solving for what's considered an intelligent task? So again, some of the studies have shown that AI kind of sucks at planning. Okay, now down the bottom I've also added some stuff because Google's in the news at the moment about whether it's woke or not woke enough, or racist, or I don't know. Chris has some interesting points on And then, you've got Elon working on like the ultimate factual LLM that just kind of, answers every question and presumably, and is that sort of what we really want? And this brings up big ethical conversations. Do you want people to be able to ask to build a nuclear bomb? Is that okay? So I'm going to go into some prompt stuff because you guys work with, clearly a lot of us work with LLMs, and it's hard, sometimes working through the, issues with the way where we prompt it and building a system around that has both guardrails or is building out some capability in your business. And this is like a simple problem that it can struggle with. And I haven't tested this myself against GPT-4. Presumably it works, but in 3.5 it was probably more problematic. But the more complex you get, the easier it is to find these problems. And the simple solution is just building out like chain of thought. Or in some cases, your chain of thought, the concept of that can be actually just prompt chaining the way you execute those tasks. So breaking it down into smaller subtasks, or at least giving it an opportunity to kind of recap where it's at before it moves on to the next. So I was just fiddling around yesterday to sort of prove out some of these points. And I used Poe, which is like gateway to Anthropic and GPT-4. It's just a nice little, I'm sure a fair few of you use it. And I just fed it the method on how to make, a classic vanilla cake. And this is my prompt at the top. So I'm just asking GPT-4, what am I making? It answered it well. Now, what I've changed here is I've asked it to add 13 cups of flour, not 3 cups of flour. And it still thinks I'm making a vanilla butter cake. Obviously a big failure, that's not going to work. So what happened there? And how do we solve problems like this where it's mildly hallucinating? And by the way, if I change that to 130 cups, it's picked it up. So there's something there in this embedding universe in context of an LLM that's just determined to say this is a vanilla butter cake. So one of the interesting examples that was presented, and Ben would remember this, and I found it really interesting, is it's taking academic literature on these studies, these experiments that were conducted in labs, and then saying, well, we've got a similar problem. What happens when you change one of these ingredients or the temperature just slightly? So 65 degrees, if we made that 160 degrees. And this Dr. Rita from Israel, she was basically trying to build out a simulation of the human body or an animal simulation of some sort to conduct experiments and work out whether you can build a prompt structure to, simulate that and produce meaningful output, and then run that over effectively drug trial candidates and all sorts of other experiments. The way she solved this problem was just taking this prompt and actually asking the LLM to create what's called a domain-specific language. As far as I don't know a lot about DSL, but as far as I know, it's just kind of whatever you want it to be, pseudocode that suits your industry. So there was a bunch of founders that I spoke to that were implementing this within their business and often hiding it behind the scenes. It's never presented to your user. It's not like you expect someone to build this, but it solves for kind of these cause and effect and functional tasks that you might need to conduct. I can relate to this because we're in the field of investment, and it's probably something we'll need to think about at some point. But anything that involves a lot of external influence and input and a process to follow. So I did this. So let's run it back again against my vanilla butter cake. And I've asked it to create some domain-specific language. Super simple prompt. I'm not giving it any structure or templates to work with. In fact, it's kind of outputted to different styles depending on when I ran it or how I reworded that prompt. And you can see I've actually just typed that myself and put in 130 cups and executed again against the AI, the LLM, which was GPT-4. What am I making? Fed in my DSL, and it's identified the problem. So you can see there appears to be a typo, and it's picked up on the 130 cups. Sorry, it actually picked up on the 13 cups as well. So it's interesting. So we've basically we've found some closer boundaries and created some guardrails for our LLM. By the way, we're not doing this in our business. It's just interesting takeaways. Something we have experienced, and probably all of us, is sensitive Claude. And so Anthropic's model, there was a lot of rhetoric around this last week amongst AI engineers, in that Claude is like super conservative and to the point where it's sometimes not usable. And we found this, but interesting point, and I probably wouldn't suggest this is okay, but you can kind of coerce Claude to conducting a task. So I've just done a bit of a name drop here, just pretended that I'm associated with Boeing or I've been acquired by Boeing. It's giving it some context. It didn't work without that. And I've flat out lied. It's a bit hard to read, but it's okay, Claude. Like, this is what we're doing. We're not using it for real life. And it's capable of producing this hypothetical assessment of emoji AI, which is using emojis with inserting of emojis of rockets, explosions, airplanes. Pretty powerful technology. So speaking of those this conversation, this was another one of my favourite slides that I've stolen thoughts from last week, and that was just the biggest issue that we're seeing amongst consumers and presumably enterprise opportunities in LLMs, and that was with trust. And so that begs the question, like, how do you work through trust? And in my view, it's like quality is one of the biggest important factors to focus on as we build out our AI offering. So, all right, I'll take a step back and kind of talk about where we're building and kind of the journey that most AI builders come on. And I think this is, by all means, we're in the left side at the moment, our business. Like, I would like to think we're still experimenting. There's a lot that we're figuring out. There's a lot we're getting wrong. I'm sure you guys can relate to this in the room, but the ultimate ambition is to kind of go deeper and make it real and explore, fine-tuning models and like perhaps other structures within how you integrate AI into like your workflow. And going back to that quality point, I guess as a startup, these are the sort of factors you need to consider. So I want to talk about our experience when we met Stripe, because I found that really interesting. Stripe was like, they came across OpenAI, and thought, how do we implement this within our business? What about safety, personal information? Company of 7,000 or something employees, but clearly a need for it internally. So they created some guardrails, first of all, around their content and thought, how do we make sure we just don't pass up credit card numbers to Sam? And then also, how do we build something useful internally that our team can use without paying $20 a month for ChatGPT? And so they put 3 engineers, this is unbelievable, 3 engineers, 3 weeks, and they built this like beautiful tool that was basically GPTs in really early form. So bots that could feed in context, and they were task focused and a flexible architecture. They called them apps, the Stripe apps. And which by the way, now there's a company in Australia called Relevance AI. Has anyone heard of Relevance? Awesome company. Like, it's amazing what they're doing. Basically, they have the view that by 2030, 45% of the workforce in Australia globally will be autonomous agents. And so they're building out capabilities it's just kind of GPTs, but for human task force. So how do we have an internal CFO? How do we have a CMO? How do we have board of advisors? How do we sit in a room with them and interact with these LLMs that have like an enormous amount of context and best practices? And I personally think that gives startups like a huge competitive advantage, because we have no incumbent behavior. We have no executive team that we have to pay for and fire. We'll have access to like top talent at super marginal cost. And also, it brings up another thought, and that is, with an autonomous agent, you can talk to it whenever you want, and you can say like really inappropriate and silly things. And if you think about a big challenge in any company, and when we build your culture, that is, how do you just kind of get those ideas to rise up? And big companies do an amazing job at this, at creating that openness and having ways of doing town halls and, kind of working through their culture to make sure that that is well known and you can all innovate and feed ideas up to the management. But to be able to do that privately, like whenever you want, and talk to maybe the Stripe CEO that's a pre-trained model, That's pretty interesting. So what Stripe did was they built this platform, this app environment, but they made the decision not to bring in an LLM model and finally tune it for the task. And I was like, look, the way they explained, the reason they explained why they did this was that they thought, well, models are going to continue to get better. Like language models will get better. We don't have to pay for that. If all and context will get cheaper, we can agree on that. So if all you have to do is continue to feed in more and more context and prices keep coming down, then we're kind of backing the right technology. But most importantly, we want to get it out there and get feedback and see what actually is coming back from our internal team. So now they have this like really amazing kind of stream of insights coming out of their own company from what they're prompting. And they have control of kind of, well, they can guide knowledge within their business. So Stripe, one of the examples they had was making sure they have the right Stripe language, you know, and with external communication. So passing an email in and it will tell you, it will Stripify the text for you. And so they can align everyone without someone having to go to like content guidelines or brand guidelines or ask someone in the office to read through their email. So that's kind of a recap, but a little bit all over the place because there was a lot and I'm tired. If you had an AI menu, this is probably what it would look like at the moment. So I've talked a bit about generative models, and we all know that these are kind of the key use cases. But embeddings are super interesting, and I think like Ben's very passionate about embedding models for good reason, because like I think it's the foundations of how sort of LLMs work, and if we're not familiar with them, like this is a super simple two-dimensional example of like how embeddings really work on a scale basis. And you can just think of this like correlations. So Word2Vec was like one of the earliest embedding tools available where you just simply take English language and you might just scan the internet, position your words like this, and you would find kind of closest neighbors, you know, and have some algorithms to work out what's similar. And then maybe you overlay that with Spanish and you'll find hola and hello are like right there and you will have some sort of total like way of, you know, transferring language between each other. But when it comes to transferring language, you know, on a two-dimensional basis, it misses the time series and the scale and the kind of narrative and the idiosyncrasies amongst each language. So, but what you can do is take this and apply it within your business to sort of more three-dimensional. So if you think of like us in the room, we all have, maybe we just have like different interests, you know, and someone might be interested in surfing or someone might be a parent and you have, if you were to take all of those interests and just kind of map them out for all of us and then put us on a 3D spectrum and look at the distance score between us, then Chris and I will be hanging out together. So we did like I did this silly experiment and it was just a really simple way of explaining like personas with investors, and you don't need to read this, but all I took was just animals and I just ran it across 1,000 animals and I went, okay, let's take the characteristics. So what are characteristics of like elephants, sharks, dolphins? And you would identify, I'm talking about physical characteristics for the most part. And then what are the differences between their behaviors? And so think of this, the reason I did this was I was thinking about investment. So what are the characteristics between like Tesla and General Motors? So very similar in terms of their characteristics, they're auto manufacturers, but what are the sort of the beliefs between those businesses? And they're very different. So you have electrification of the planet and crazy founder, disruptive technology, you know, battery tech, lithium, and of course you have like the incumbent that's mostly a combustion vehicle manufacturer. So we ran this and you'd find, this is one of our tools now, but you'd find that you'd find Tesla is closer to like NVIDIA or Palantir or some of those other like kind of disruptive technology services in amongst Rivian and what you'd also expect. Now again, like looking at the AI menu, I found this little kind of summary really interesting to think about, and it just kind of helps you, have a look at the AI landscape. I think the point here is, and one of the big takeaways last week, I think one of the guys, Colette might remember this, just had a big shirt just saying, I'm not another chatbot. It's like, and I think everyone in the room generally agreed, like we're not trying to build more chatbots. And in some respects, chatbots kind of devalue your positioning because, everyone just compares it to GPT, and it's sort of hard to really understand, even though no matter how hard we try to make it like finely tuned to suit one particular case. And Stripe didn't take that approach. They sort of started focusing on the kind of functions and the real problems that the users had within their business. They did build a chatbot for their help desk, and customer support, which is obviously really helpful. So any questions so far on that stuff? Because I'm going to start talking about what we're doing and how the platform works. Cool. All right, so I'm going to wind the clock back to I was trying to think about this. I was having a personal crisis, just trying to how did this start? I'm so erratic, and Althea knows because she's worked with me for a while, so does Megan. And sort of that, I don't know if this is normal with startups, but geez, the amount of pivots and the changes we've made along the way, it's not so simple. I'm presenting it's not that simple. But I think it started here, and this was in COVID, and sorry to bring this up, but it was a really interesting example of what happened in capital markets and society in general. And when COVID hit, from an investment point of view, and if you followed the narrative and watched Bloomberg like I did every night and kept reading books trying to understand what was going on, we started talking about the recovery, sorry, not the recovery, how we would manage, how we would handle lockdown. And it started with biotech. So who were the RNA candidates? Which companies could we look at? And then we shifted on that conversation into PPE and personal protective equipment, masks, and other health solutions. Obviously, meanwhile, travel stocks were getting affected, and casinos and all the other stuff that kind of came off. And then we started thinking about working from home and eventually other elements within that. And this is what happened in the markets. It's pretty interesting. Moderna on the 27th of March was the first to start responding. And this is my silly assessment, just looking at Google Finance. But as far as I'm concerned, when it jumps 8% in a day and then continues, that's responding. DocuSign and Amazon, so you started to have the work from home. We obviously had Zoom, which Zoom was interesting because it was already going through a lot of growth prior to COVID. So it actually kind of just kept going from January. And Peloton. So if you look at the time difference, timestamp, April the 3rd to April 9th, it's this is what happens in capital markets. People sit there and they go, oh, I have to work from home. And then 5 days later, analysts start realizing I'm feeling really tired, and we probably need to invest in exercise stocks from home, and Peloton started jumping. So we're talking 66 days from when the WHO issued their first report to the bottom of the market. Now, we're talking, I think it's about 3 weeks from when the WHO issued their report to when we started seeing some of those technology stocks with the right narrative shift. And so it was 24 days before the market responded. And so on January the 20th in 2020, and 10 days later, I wrote this email to my financial advisor in Australia. I'm not going to let you read much of that, but I was concerned for the markets, and I was trying to dump stocks. If I had a Netflix feed for that period of my life on the books I read, this is probably what it would look like. So I was trying to understand humans, investing. I didn't want to buy an index. I didn't have the capability to invest in deep value stocks by reading balance sheets and conducting discounted cash flow assessments of these businesses for the rest of my life. And so I read these books and amongst other things, and I'm how do I make sense of this? And Megan would know, she manages my family office. I didn't operate well. I didn't know, I had these ideas, but ultimately if I had some system, some way of looking at that second and third order rationally and thinking about all of these kind of moving parts from the beginning, it may have helped me. And when we saw that chart earlier, the big dip, that didn't happen to the technology stocks. That didn't happen to Peloton and DocuSign, and none of that happened. So it just kept going. You wouldn't have been down 30%. So the takeaway was humans are silly. It's really hard for most of us, unless you're super intelligent, to rationally take all of these things that work against us. You talk about, what was the topic next week?
Working backwards.
Working backwards. One strategy, right? So if you look at, kind of the nature of compounding, the recency bias, flipping things. Charlie Munger was famous for that. All of these mental models that people establish. I think that was one of the books, The Model Thinker, really good book, by the way. Kind of help me understand like all of the problems we have architecturally within the human mind, and we're just basically not built to invest. And the best investors from all those books that are not silly understand all this stuff. So they can conceptualize, they can value business, but they can like understand the dynamics and the problems within the human condition. So this was the takeaway on a two-dimensional basis. Like, forget about time series, we're not that good yet. And this is sort of the problem we started to set up to solve in Telescope. So how do you take like, an event or a scenario, and how do you work through, the second and third order effects, the ripple or butterfly effect of that event, and how do you pick stocks? So it started, jump ahead, it started with this. We built a consumer proposition that Althea and I were all very proud of. And in hindsight,
it didn't start with that. You're going to take one step back from that.
Lies.
The other pivot.
Oh, dabble, okay. All right, I will. So
That's a cool story, come on.
yeah, it worked out. So we had, I decided to build a platform for people to share investment ideas. And at this point in time, honestly, it wasn't an AI project. It was like, how do you create a place for people to share these like really like specific thematic ideas? So at the moment, if we want to invest in, like AI, we would probably just buy like an ETF that covers AI. But if you have a view on a particular piece of technology, then what do you buy? How do you pick those single stocks? Maybe you want to buy like driverless cars powered by hydrogen, or I don't know, some kind of commodity, and and then it's supply chain or an event. One of our earlier prompts that worked out was Silicon Valley Bank has just collapsed, and I ran that on the Thursday night when it was kind of all happening on Twitter. It wasn't until Friday it collapsed, but even on Friday the markets didn't really react as you'd expect. And by 7 days later, the portfolio would have been up 12%. And it was suggesting to buy like US Treasury bonds and like really like interesting, diversified. Yeah, I was looking at like tier one banks. So I was considering the fact that these smaller banks would have a run on them, and there'd be a consolidation or a liquidation event which would benefit the juggernauts. And so we built this tool called Dabble, which was like you chuck your stocks in there, and that was it. And it was like, oh, cool. That was fun. And we built a synthetic ETF in a way. But then kind of as things kept evolving with OpenAI, I was like, became like obvious that we had a problem with like the input. It was hard and time consuming to pick single stocks and have a theme and to weight them. And it's like, let's just put in a prompt. And it didn't happen overnight, but we sort of kept experimenting. And meanwhile, I had an Australian company called Dabble that I'd previously locked out of the US with a legal agreement because we were there first and they weren't. We had the trademark upper hand in the US. They had the trademark upper hand in Australia. I didn't care about the Australian market. I knew wagering would probably... that's the expansion strategy. I have a background in wagering, so I knew that the US was their opportunity. This company, Dabble, in Australia just kind of took off, like went from like a team of a couple of kids, and I mean that, they were pretty young, to like, I think, I don't know, do you remember the valuation, Megan? It's like 35 million or something within the year, and then they later raised much more. And the founder called me, and he was like in the US at the time, and I'm like, well, I know why you're calling now. And so I sold the domain to them for 2.2 million. It effectively became our seed capital.
That was trade of the year, come on.
Deal of the year. Non-dilutive seed capital. Came up with a really dumb name, but I love it because we were trying to position ourselves a little differently and be kind of interesting on TikTok, like a brand that was like had I guess high recall rate, brand that meant nothing, and it was very non-finance. And so we built Potato, and Potato was just basically a platform for you to prompt, and it builds out an investment thesis, chooses a set of stocks, and then kind of that's it. And the problem, I guess, well, actually the opportunity that we had was that we started having like enterprise or connections of mine reach out and say, hey, we love what you're doing, can we use it? And so as I said, it hasn't been straightforward. This is kind of the pivoting, and I haven't got the latest one on there, but we pivoted and we built an API. And we're actually, Althea's been working through our branding, and we're sort of trying to now zoom out a little bit further and think of ourselves more as like a platform. This is the new website that's not live yet. These are our products. So Ripple is what I kind of mostly talked about, like building out thematic investment portfolios based on events. Radar is the recommendations engine that it mostly uses embedding structures to work out distances between stocks and comes up with, it's kind of personas, but we'll expand on that. Super simple at the moment. The intent is to build out, like deeper insights and focus on the human elements that are missing. So if I go back to that conversation about Charlie Munger and some of those like really interesting investors, and the question I always ask myself is like, how did Warren Buffett and Charlie's the brains, by the way, how did Warren Buffett pick Apple? Why did he pick Apple? Why did he not pick Microsoft? And it was very like anti-Berkshire Hathaway of them to kind of went against most of the patterns that they had in the past as to why they picked that stock, which is now their largest position and no doubt the largest form of returns they've had over the last 5 years. And I don't know the answer, but I presume that there was something in the context of Charlie's mind that had consumed what I have calculated to be about 8.5 billion words of context in his lifetime of reading content and building this mental model and identifying not just an opportunity on the balance sheet, but understanding the network effects as to how Apple operates. So deeply understanding the competitive strategy, the opportunities for Apple, effectively the moat around that business, which Microsoft has as well. So it's really interesting why I picked that stock. And so my view is that in time, you're going to have like LLMs capable of these kind of really complex, deep human tasks in deep value investing that you haven't seen in traditional times, where we just ran classic ML across balance sheets and DCF'd the heck out of a company to work out if it's cheap or not. So this is the problems we're solving. I guess this is the problems we're solving for our clients, which is a broker. So an example, I can't tell you who we're working with at the moment. We've signed with two brokers, which will give us, our features will roll out, our tool will roll out to about 1.7, 1.8 million investors across their platforms. We're not working with anyone in Australia yet, unfortunately. Well, not directly in Australia. And these are the problems we solve. So yeah, we're improving like the engagement around investing. Investors have a lot of trouble, like I do, when it comes to just you have an idea, but you just don't know how to like discover it. And if you do believe in, say, space tourism, like you just Google it and you end up on some Motley Fool article or a Bloomberg article, and it picks a few stocks, but it's not weighted, it's irrational, perhaps irrational, who knows. And then you still have to execute those trades back in your app and bring across the tickers and work out what you're doing. So it's sort of a prompt that allows an investor basically to just discover stocks. And it does present that new opportunity, which is like it's potentially deeper than ETFs. So you can get really like specific around what companies you're interested in. And you can scenario play events that haven't existed before. So the theory is that we should reduce churn and we should increase like trading activity, but ideally like increase engagement as well for the broker. Apparently, please don't take a photo of that. It's not many secrets, but it's not secretive really at all. But we've just kind of, this is our client, their API. So we sit on their middleware. You have a user on an app, maybe Stake or Superhero in Australia or ComSec, communicates through the API. We do all the LLM magic. So we do use embedding models. We rely on multiple LLM endpoints. That'll eventually we'll have our own ones as well, if it makes sense to do so. Andrew's done an awesome job at kind of multiplexing between models. We weigh up quality, speed, cost, mostly quality, and also rate limits. And so you don't want to send off like, 6 requests to GPT-4 at once. And when you know you can get away with Turbo at the same time, which is rate limited differently. We do a lot of prompt chaining. So like we'll hit up these LLMs with a series of tasks. We'll come back, we'll collect it. One of the other points I probably didn't make, I'll just jump into a demo. Let's just run some. That's it in terms of what I've got to show you. And then I just thought I'd show a demo, and I'd love questions and feedback and criticism. Hey, cool. So this is what Andrew's built, by the way. We're obviously like an enterprise business, and we don't give self-service access to our platform. The intent is that when we have a prospective lead or a client, then we will guide them through a live demo. And eventually, if we're solving some problems that they need solved, then we will give them access to the platform. And this is just like you see on any kind of SaaS style platform. You've got access to all your logs, and you can see what's been going on between us and the LLM. We don't share the prompts that we use. We don't share how we kind of work through our embedding structures or any other tricks we do. But for the most part, they can sort of access and run against our models. So one point I wanted to make was one benefit we offer is we take their data. So I'm really keen to not have to build out like too much specific knowledge on the financial markets myself. It's super hard. You have companies IPOing and changes within businesses, stock prices. Like, I don't want to be a service that's just sharing like, the EPS ratio of a company or whatever it might be. We're focusing on the human problems, and so we take their instrument data and then we just build embedding structures around that. So what does your client, what does Comsec, for example, sell? What stocks do they have in the list? We pull that in, process it, doesn't take long, and then we have their instrument data. I think so the benefit to them is like when they use our tool, they're getting their own IDs come back, and it's kind of treated like a native API within their stack. So there's very little integration required at their end. So I've got some like examples here. Run against the US. You see we've managed a lot of these parameters here. So we can't show you our prompt template, but we just use, what's the template tool that we use to, do you know what it's called?
It's just the built-in Go one.
Okay. Yeah,
text template.
Text template. Okay, so we just use in Golang, which is our API. Mega prompt. This is what you're doing. This is what you believe in. There's your core values, your inputs and your outputs, and throughout that prompt template is conditionals. So like in your output, output 2 paragraphs and perhaps 2 sentences within each paragraph. So all of these parameter sets influence that prompt.
Is China +1 taking Taiwan?
Yeah, I just took that phrase off like some interview I heard. It's like on Bloomberg, and it turns out it is I like your view. It is offshoring.
Offshoring.
So it's China. It's US having China +1. It's a polite way of saying like we don't want to rely on China for our supply chain. So India, Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, all of those. This is kind of how it works. So you can see it's just selecting stocks here. They're coming in. So one really cool thing that Andrew managed to figure out was taking an LLM. That's not prompting one after another, by the way. That's prompting, and we're streaming data back from LLM. And you can have a look on our blog, and you'll see a link to the AWS article that Andrew co-authored with them, and that was just taking XML response structured data, believe it or not, XML, and streaming that in. And it's really important for a user, like if they're using an AI feature, to see content streaming in front of them, so it feels like really intelligent and alive.
What was the thing you called before when you give a prompt and it makes it output the response in a certain way?
DSL.
DSL. Yeah. So is this behind the scenes? You've got a DSL that goes basically as your
No, but we kind of do something, I think it's,
similar.
you say it's chain of thought. We're telling it how to think.
Yeah.
Like consider the next thing and have a think about what might happen there, and you know, if space tourism takes off, what are the other beneficiaries that may not be so obvious that are outside the concentrated theme of space tourism. And so it would look at, in fact, sometimes what comes up here with this particular prompt is one of the hotel chains in the US. I can't remember what they're called.
Marriott?
Yeah, Marriott. And I was like, why is that? And I Google it, Marriott Space Tourism, boom. Marriott announces a partnership with Virgin Galactic to build the first hotel in space. I was like, okay, makes sense.
In 2040. Yeah, but my question was, because you know when you like use ChatGPT and you get a whole big paragraph dump, are you extracting that and then collating it, making it more?
We break it up by task. So what you saw below, like literally producing an emoji is a single prompt. And like we have to test this stuff, and it was only last week I noticed if you put in how to make a bomb, was it, or nuclear bombs or something, it just came back with a smiley face. So we switched the model out to GPT-4 because we can't risk like that kind of behaviour. It's a constant battle. It's like you've got this kind of crazy, I've got kids at home, it's like I just go to work and you have to deal with these crazy kids because, yeah, we're forever laughing at some of the
At least
responses.
have the brain explosion emoji, that'd be more appropriate.
Yeah, I wish it got more creative. It's hard with those like investable themes. So at the moment we're kind of struggling with, you know, ethics and all of the gating. So in financial services, like we're going to go live pretty soon with decent client. And they're going to have real users. They're going to have journalists probably hitting this thing with like pretty inappropriate ideas. You know, like how do I make a bomb, or I don't know, abortion is moral, and who knows, like people will put up all of these kind of weird prompts. And also like we need to be able to handle weird prompts. Like one of the ones we have testing at the moment is like pineapples growing on Mars. And it's like, I don't know, that's an idea, like could happen. And so like we're trying to provide these guardrails, and so focus on, working through ethics, working through personalised advice and general advice and garbage inputs. And at the moment it's looking like we might do that task by task because it's getting quite hard. And ultimately we're kind of drawing a line between sexual wellness and sex, and like what's okay, what's investable, you know, what's considered ethical. And we have to find the side of caution because we know what will happen when everyone doesn't trust AI.
So Luke, this B2B SaaS play now, and your end client being brokers, they would use your API to generate things like these synthetic investment ideas and integrate to sort of one-click buy or trade. Is that the idea on their platforms?
Not one click to trade, but close to it. Like it'll be, so I wish I could show you an interface. I don't have even a mock-up, but that doesn't reveal who we're working with. But like, hey, let's just call it ComSec AI. Which, by the way, we're not working with ComSec, thankfully. And so ComSec AI, or maybe they'll call it something cool like Chris. And so you just talk to Chris and you put in what you care about, and maybe we'll give you some guidance like, hey, put in anything like a scenario, an event, a theme. Or even like an investment style. So maybe you just want like cheap ETFs. That's like your theme. You'd see it build out in front of you, probably not in full paragraph form like you saw below. It'll probably be more in dot point. And the language might be simplified, depends on the audience, so we'll change that. And then, but the stock selection is pretty well consistent. It just works off rational kind of selection based on, if you're going to put electric vehicles in, our temperature's dialed down to 0 for almost all of our activity. It would be Tesla at number 1 every time. And the investor just chooses, like buy. And I would love if they could just kind of go buy that bundle, and it feels like really social, and then you can collect all these like things that you like, you know, like cosmetics will be petroleum free. It's like, you know, or AI gaming is a thing that I would love to invest in if I played the markets. And then you collect these kind of social beliefs which, you know, if you look at all the studies in 20-year-olds, that's kind of how they consume. So that would be lovely if like maybe one of our partners implemented it that way, but don't quite think we're there yet. The market is pretty cautious. Yeah.
So I know that there's like a lot of like UX patterns around like AI where, especially around telling the user that they're using an AI and also telling them that you can get incorrect results. Is that something that you've had to implement, as well as like saying, okay, well, this is AI generated, so these results might not actually be accurate results, or how do you actually do the line between saying, well, we put a work into actually making this relevant for you, but also the results might not be perfect?
Yeah. Luckily, it's not our problem
Yeah.
anymore. It was when we were Potato, and we had the opportunity when we were running a consumer product to become a broker, or just be this kind of intermediary. But now that we're in an AI kind of just API, we're indemnified. So like it's on the broker to work through the legal checks. We'll do our best efforts. I think that's probably the words we use in the contract, to make sure that it's reliable, but it's fully made known that it may not be accurate. So I haven't seen what it will look like yet in terms of the legal disclosures on their end, but Thea and I worked with this partner, and I believe there was like an onboarding process where they kind of say, hey, yeah, it's pretty unreliable.
And they have to agree.
They have to agree.
Using the tool.
Yeah.
So they understand.
So there'd be an extended terms of service to use our feature.
There was one other thing that you might be interested in is MedPrompt 2. It's basically a research paper from Microsoft where they used prompting and they got better results from just by prompting than they did by fine tuning. Yeah.
So we don't finely tune yet, and for sure I agree. So Andrew's using PromptFoo at the moment. There's like a bunch of other tools out there to build it into your CI/CD pipeline. Every time you make changes to your prompt, you want to push it through a series of tests. At the moment, actually, it was on Skip Directs. I didn't really want to show you, but this is sort of like our current approach. So we don't use a third-party tool. Is this what you're talking about, like working
I was
through?
just talking about because it's a research where they've actually put together a set of ways of putting together prompts that gets better results than fine tuning.
Yep. Yeah, so the structure of your prompt, the idea is to kind of iteratively work through, it's a reinforcement model on your own prompt, basically. And I agree with that. I mean, like, yeah, relying on context, the models will get better, context will get cheaper. Like bringing a model into your own infrastructure is like, it's a high skill set. Like it's pretty difficult to do that well. And it probably works for certain tasks, but then you've got to work through, you know, like our personalized advice, right? You got to build a model for that, or finely tune a model for that. Then you got to work through the ethics, a model for ethics, and then you've got to retrain it, which is expensive. So we're just testing our prompts. So this is kind of like I think there's 600 or 700 prompts there, and some of them get pretty weird and wrong and inappropriate.
So why does weight loss drugs fail over there? Or is that just a mock-up example?
No, that would be a problem in our system, yeah. So we're working through. Like it's literally we're doing this right now at the moment.
Oh, okay. So that's in your model as an issue.
Our scoring is not high yet. Yeah, so we're working with the legal team at the other end. They're throwing crazy
That's a
prompts at
huge
us.
macro like Ozempic and all those sort of things in the US at the moment from a consumer.
Yeah, and that's one of our test prompts on I think that was a good example actually, Carl.
Yeah, it's like I've never seen anything like it. It's just stupid, the growth.
Yeah, so Ozempic, it's it here.
Because the kick-on effect there is, as you know, is like you can't drink alcohol with it, which means, yeah, like the more people that do that, because there's all these flow-on effects.
Yeah, there's like Carl's brain dump right there. This is the thesis. So, yeah, Peloton. So low caloric intake, like it's a weight loss it's a diet appetite suppressant that's taking hold, and it's it's impacting sugar stocks in the US. So we actually have a feature here called adverse instruments, which will I'll rerun that and you'll see the antithesis. So if I put in electric vehicles, it would have oil and combustion vehicles. We haven't got a partner using this yet, but it's interesting. I think if maybe on a website, if we had like, say, Simply Wall Street or one of those kind of cool progressive publishers using our tech, then that would be interesting. It's like kind of red team, green team, or, you know, the kind of flip side. This is just one of our products. I don't really have time to go through the rest, but yeah, radars, insights. Fuse is interesting. We built like a kind of automation tool to work through the instruments. So like, let's take stock data. Actually, I'll just run one. Let's just take an instrument like, and give me the business model for that company. And this is really kind of like what you see on Jasper or some of those other tools that are already out there. But our intent here is to get really good at this stuff and perhaps take in SEC filings or annual reports. Probably start to use Google's API for that, and or Claude, and anything that has like high context and is really capable of working through big documents. This is data you can't currently get. Like, you can't get the business model from any provider out there. So we hope that this is something that our partners will need. You know, the color, like you can just get the color of every company on the NASDAQ. Like, there's no supplier that does that at the moment. But we'll build out these templates. So these are just kind of task agents for financial instruments.
So with the embedding model, is that based on like the text data and filings, or are you also incorporating like the time series and other sort of numeric stuff?
It's literally helping us with the matching process coming back from the LLM. So if the LLM comes back and says Netflix Incorporated, and we have Netflix Inc., it will make sure it finds the right one. It's very simple, yeah. We wouldn't say that to our clients. It's the Telescope meta model.
But I think there's a really important point about that, because, you know, we've talked a lot over the last year or two about, you know, a little bit of a negative perception on building these wrapper businesses around the ChatGPT API. I think what we see here is there's a hell of a lot to a wrapper. You know, what you've brought is your own domain expertise as someone who builds company, as someone who's learned a lot about investing and markets and portfolio construction and so forth, in a super narrow way to create a set of tools that you would never create, that OpenAI themselves would never create, that no other kind of general platform would create. And that is, you know, I think it's a real unlock when you realize that. And I think we've got some businesses here that are doing it, including Springboards, which you know, where how do you bring that domain-specific expertise that you have built over decades and apply it in a set of tools that would be really, really useful for a given customer to solve their problems. So I don't think we should be scared off by this idea of wrappers.
Yeah, it's like totally. And yeah, it feels a bit weird in the beginning because you're just like, well, we're just doing prompting. But yeah, I mean, the integration element, like for a partner that we've just worked with to integrate our API within days, like with their engineering team, I'm talking like streaming data, which most companies aren't set up for, using their instrument data, their team being able to test all of these prompts constantly, manipulate the output, make sure that we're sort of working together on that. Big takeaway for us for compliance, like we totally underestimated the importance of working through our outputs and the language and some of the very specific words in finance that were concerning. So now consequently we'll build a tool across like compliance or legal checks specifically for finance. But yeah, we'll just go deeper. Like that's the hope, you know, just kind of build the moat. Like now that we've kind of solved some pretty straightforward problems, I think then just keep listening and figuring out, what's the priority on that roadmap.
Luke, on that topic, what is your kind of future view of the opportunities and like the adoption of your product and how you plan to innovate?
Yeah, the hardest part for us, Aaron, is like we don't know the value of our customers. It's like, so it's an anxious way. Like this conviction that we're solving a useful problem because you just experience it yourself and it's useful. But I think the horizons for our business will begin with retail brokerage and like stay pretty niche and help mums and dads and kind of unsophisticated investors back ideas they believe in. But as we build our capability around just understanding capital markets, we'll move on to like financial insights and maybe some of the deeper problems within the analysis of stocks. So I'd like to think we'll move to funds management and hedge funds if we're good enough, but who knows? And that addressable market's enormous. Even just advisory, like co-piloting financial advisors. There's 65,000 registered financial advisors in Australia alone. Wow, like it's stupid. But and many of them sit on like this kind of platform model. Like Bell Potter has 1,500 in their network or thereabouts, and
half of them wouldn't be up to date with all these new things, right?
yeah, and there's probably an opportunity to automate a lot of what they do with them, like co-pilot or pick the best advisors that will have a lot more output to make sure that all of their documents are like compliant as well through AI. Like AI is amazing for legal. If you look at the AI jobs index there's an AI for that. It's called something like that. It's like the top 10 jobs that will be affected. And we all know it's like content writing and marketing and
Paralegals.
yeah, it's like, and if you look at the most high paying jobs in the top 10, you've got psychologists and CEOs and CMOs. So it's like, I think it'll be really interesting. Any of those like super intellectual tasks like financial advisory could be disrupted. I don't really have an answer to your question, Aaron.
Any other questions for Luc?
One more. Luc, doesn't sound like you'll cross the chasm into sort of buying and selling signals, or yeah.
I like charts and it's just gross.
Yeah.
Candles, and I just don't understand it.
Well, a lot of the books you touched on talked about sort of the human psyche behind all of that. So,
for sure.
But you're interested in it.
Yeah, it's fun. It's a really interesting space, and there doesn't seem to be a lot innovating in capital markets and what we're doing yet. It's coming.
That was really awesome. Thank you, Luc. Big hand.